Next, at number 9, Address Unknown is the only film on this list which most people will recognise as being slice-of-life drama. Set at some point during the late 70s or early 80s when many Koreans still lived in poverty under what was effectively, and some might argue still is, a US-installed fascist dictatorship behind a tissue-thin veneer of democracy, this movie tells the story of poor villagers who live near a US army base. In fact, having been born in 1960 and lived this kind of life himself, leaving school at 15 to get a job repairing machines, Ki-Duk once stated in an interview that this was the film that he most wanted young American audiences in particular to see because he wants them to understand what it's like to live in a third world country. But leaving aside its connection to recent South Korean history and the wider social and political issues therein, while every other movie on this list, with the possible exception of The Coast Guard, focuses on the emotional connection, the spiritual connection, and the bond between 2 or 3 defining characters, with the others all simply revolving around them, every character in Address Unknown plays a part in the overall story, for lack of a better term. After all, instead of being a 3 or 5 act structure with a beginning, a middle, and an end, introducing and then resolving the conflict during the runtime of the film, it is a glimpse into their sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes brutal, and sometimes deeply disturbing lives, never flinching or holding back even for a single second, as it shows us the realities which we all know exist, but often conveniently choose to ignore. But bearing that in mind though, the 2 defining characters at the heart of this film, whose narrative arcs form the foundation of the 2 main plot lines, are first of all the middle-aged woman who was abandoned by an African-American soldier after she had his baby, meaning that she and her son are now effectively outcasts and untouchable, both because of Korean society's archaically conservative attitudes towards sex and children outside of marriage, and because of the concept of racial purity or racial cleanliness, condemning mixed-race families, especially those with non-Koreans who have darker skin, as being dirty and impure, and who now, more than a decade after being abandoned, still writing letters and clinging to the fantasy that they and their child will live happily ever after, in spite of never receiving a single reply from him, hence the title of the movie, is viciously abused and beaten by her teenage son, who now resents and blames her for everything. Particularly the fact that he was born a mongrel, deliberately using the most derogatory slur possible in this video because that's honestly how he feels, believing that he will never truly have a home or be accepted anywhere. And secondly, the teenage girl whose eye was injured by her brother a few years earlier, drawn to a misfit American soldier who hates the army and hates Korea, but still promises to make her normal in inverted commas and to take her away from it all. But hang on a second though, noble American saviours sweeping into your life and promising to protect and rescue you, but only doing so for their own self-serving ends, meaning that they abandon you as soon as it becomes convenient to do so, and thus leave you to wallow in a pit of your own misery, suffering and despair. Congratulations, Ki-Duk, because I literally only just got that subtext. Very subtle. Well done. Beyond that subtle middle finger to the US military though, since this is a Ki-Duk film, almost every subplot in this movie is an exploration of love, no matter what form that love may take, or at the very least, of the emotions and interactions which people sometimes mislabel as love. But while the movie's narrative and dialogue structure, as well as the fact that it doesn't bend reality like so much of Ki-Duk's other work, will make it more accessible to English-speaking and other quote-unquote Western audiences who are more used to the Hollywood style of storytelling, this is counterbalanced by the unflinching reality which I mentioned a moment ago. As a matter of fact, if you're a dog lover, animal rights activist, or otherwise care deeply about animal welfare, then I warn you as emphatically as humanly possible to avoid this movie like the plague.